You're listening to Spark TV, where we bring you daily interviews with real women in business at all stages. I'm your host, Danielle Lewis, and I am so grateful to have you here. Amazing! Catherine, welcome to Spark TV.
Thanks so much for having me, Danny.
I am so excited to have you here and share your story. Let's start out by telling everyone who you are and what you do.
My name's Catherine Ashton, and I'm the founder and CEO of a social enterprise called Critical Info.
Critical Info now. What the heck does Critical Info do? Tell us.
Well, as the name implies, we help people get their information together. So, when a critical incident or an accident or when someone dies, it's all in place and other people know about it. So, they're not left with a mess like we were when our friend died in 2023.
Oh, wow. Interesting when businesses are born from necessity and sometimes tragedy and horrible things happening. But interesting that you've taken something that was potentially quite horrible to go through, I'm sure, and turned that into something that's so empowering for other people.
Look, it was a gap that I discovered that I didn't realize existed.
Mm.
And I was in a situation where I could turn it into a business. So for me, I had been happily working at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Victoria for 13 years, managing sort of major events as part of their programming team. And for me, I thought I would have been doing that forever. And most people do work at that job forever. But I was on my way to work in 2019 and I was on the Monash. And if anyone knows that, it can be a car park. And the person behind me didn't realize it was a car park and hit me from behind.
Oh my
So
God.
that ended up me developing chronic pain after I had spinal surgery from that accident.
Wow.
And so I was sort of like in my, early 40s, only qualified for events or conservation and land management, thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? I have to
Mm.
manage my chronic pain and the options aren't that spectacular when you look at the workforce for managing a condition and returning to part-time work. So
Mm.
I was really in a situation where I didn't know what I was going to do. But in hindsight, it was fortunate because when our friend Roland died in February of 2023, it meant that I could actually spend the 6 weeks with his two adult children who had to travel from overseas. They live
Mm.
in the States, and it meant that I could spend time with them going through everything they needed to do to settle his estate. And I just couldn't believe that there wasn't something that I could just hand over to them and say, here, this is what we needed to do. So
Yeah.
being the good producer I started an Excel spreadsheet. And yeah, that Excel spreadsheet has now turned into the critical info platform to help others.
I just think this is so fabulous. I turned old this year, and that has meant that I've suddenly thought I need to do all my adult things. And I've got the will and I've got my little folder. But I think about, when you just said all of the critical info, I just think about firstly if my husband passed away or if I passed away and left my husband with my mess of a life, how difficult it would be and how all of these things that we don't get taught how to do, or where's the checklist, or what's the thing. But also, and so that's problem number one. But then also, problem number two is I know for myself how unorganized I am and how, there are logins here and there, and bank accounts and businesses and all of those things. I just, I always think about how if you really love the people around you, perhaps being a little organized is a nice way to show them that you love them.
And I think that is so true. And for me, I didn't realize that people weren't doing this or didn't know
Mm.
how to do this because I'm the youngest of four children. I've always had a will since I was 18. I was the only one of my family that didn't join the armed forces. And my
Mm.
father he worked in as a clerk in the coroner's court. So
Oh,
we were
wow.
always a very open, conversations about death, dying, our wishes. So there was never any confusion in the family that I was raised in. So when we faced this situation when our friend died, and we didn't know where his car keys were. We didn't even know if his car
Mm.
was parked in the apartment downstairs, like in the apartment block. Like we
Wow.
had to start at basics, and we didn't know if he had a will, and then obviously then having to navigate his children through it. It was
Mm.
such a difficult thing to do. And as you just said, Danny, it's one thing to actually have your personal life, but most of your audience will actually have a business life as well, as our friend
Yeah.
did. And so he ran a decorative painting company, and so we had to also, go through and lodge tax returns for his business. We had to close down
Wow.
all of his registrations. Thankfully, he didn't have any staff, but it is so overwhelming to do these things when you don't have a map and you don't
Mm.
have any idea where to begin, and you're trying to grieve.
Yeah, and it's just the things that you don't even think of. It's interesting that you say that about, I made the probably sweeping comment about my businesses and the mess that I would have leave someone, but I do reflect on a friend of mine who also passed away a couple of years ago, and I didn't have to look after the estate. His sister did, and that was one of the big things. She came to me and she said, he has clients and we don't know the password for their, I think it was a Shopify account or something like that. Like, do you have any idea where we would even start? And so the impact of a death or a passing is so widespread, and you're right, like the only thing you want to be doing at that time is grieving.
And it's
Mm.
so true that, like, you and I are just having a conversation now, but we're recalling stories of people who have also had similar experiences. And
Mm.
when I started seeing whether there was a need for, something like this, like the critical info platform in the market, I started speaking to people who had been in the industry, asking them what their thoughts were. And what I found is that everyone has a personal story about how they've been impacted.
Mm.
And so, death is a universal thing, and it's something that is the only thing we're all guaranteed to experience at some stage of life. And
Yeah.
yet we don't prepare for it.
Isn't it bizarre? It is a topic that people have a really hard time talking about. It's interesting, even as I go through this experience and as I was preparing my will and I started talking to my mum and dad about it and theirs and I'm like, oh, come to think of it, I don't even know where your will is. Like, or do you have one? Do you whatever? And they're like, oh yeah. You, we have a will. It's there. You're in it, and you and your two siblings are like the executors, so you can battle it out. And I was like, firstly, that's a terrible decision to make, but I'm glad this has opened up a forum for us to talk about what your plans are, because our family is very much we don't talk about anything. Everything is swept under the rug. But I just love that you said that. Like, death is a universal thing. It is something that we will all experience in some, and we are just so uncomfortable talking about it.
And it's really strange for me because the more you talk about it, you more realize that it impacts every aspect of your life.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but when you talk about it, it actually makes you have very strong clarity on what you value and
Mm.
and what's important to you, and where you want to spend your time. And that was something I had the opportunity to speak to Kate Christie, who's a time management expert, on the Don't Be Caught Dead podcast that I run. And she said, that's it.
Sidebar, that's the best name ever for a podcast. Oh my God, that's incredible. Sorry,
Again,
interrupted you, but that was too good.
no, that's fine. And look, that's the reason why is because you should be approaching the conversation of death the way in which you approached the conversation about life, with a
Mm.
sense of humor and openness and honesty, you know? And so that is the reason why I called it Don't Be Caught Dead, is because A, you shouldn't be caught dead. Like that's a bad position to be in. But if you are, and we are all going to be there, just be prepared and have the conversation beforehand. And so, yeah, it was all of these people that were coming up to me either at events or when I was reaching out to people saying, hey, do you think that, this is useful? That everyone had a personal story. So that's how the podcast came about last year, was really a way in which to initiate those conversations in a really safe environment. People can listen to other experts within the industry, learn about things like water cremation, which is now a thing in Australia.
What's water cremation?
So, water cremation, most people, when they think about cremation, is the standard sort of flame cremation,
Yep.
whereas the actual term for water cremation is alkaline hydrolysis. So, it's a process
Wow.
where you dissolve the body over a period of time in a solution of water, effectively. So.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, see, and like this is the beauty of being in this space and working here, is that there's all of these amazing things that you can learn about and you can talk
Mm.
about. And just because we're talking about it doesn't mean it's going to bring it on or, be any
Yeah.
curse or anything like that. But I see on a daily basis the impact that happens when families haven't spoken about it, and
Mm.
the problems that happen with grieving, and just the conflict that happens is just devastating. So yeah, however you do it, it's is just making sure people have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that that is incredible. And I do love that it is just start with the conversation, this is kind of a long road of things to get prepared and talk about and decide. So if you just kind of, I guess, simplify it down to let's just start the conversation, then that is going to be the catalyst for making everything easier along the way.
And that's so true. And I love the example that you provided, Danny, about just asking your parents, whether they had a
Yeah.
will. That's a really basic level to start, because then you know what you're dealing with. And the fact that you were an executor in a legal document and you didn't know about it,
Yeah.
probably something should have been a
Thanks, Mum and
conversation.
Dad.
Probably should have been a
Ridiculous.
conversation about consent before that one. But it is a classic example. It's just, and I think that also there is a level of assumed responsibility or
Mm,
that comes with these things. And I think that, if you look statistically, the majority of us in the population across Australia will have some sort of caring responsibility for someone who is either a friend or a family member, someone who's near and dear to us at some
mm.
stage in our life. So we have to develop the skills to have these conversations, regardless of how difficult they are.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you just saying that. That was when I got my will done. That was the thing that my lawyer said. If you are unable to look after yourself, there's another document that your will doesn't cover. I haven't done that step yet. Oh my God. So you've just reminded me that I have to do that as well.
Yeah,
It's very
and
interesting.
that document that he or she is referring to is in, depending on what state you're in, and because the joys, everyone, if you're not aware of this, the laws in every state of Australia are completely different. So to
Love it.
navigate this space, not only to have to do the work, but then to actually work out what state you're in and what law applies, is just an
Mm.
added layer of fun you get to experience. So the document that they're referring to is an advanced care directive or an advanced care plan, and some people may remember it as a power of attorney or a medical power of
Mm.
attorney. So it is actually appointing a decision maker to make your decisions when you can't.
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm just glad we have this conversation. Isn't it funny though? Like you just talking about things makes you aware of the things that are still on your list. So then tell me, because I guarantee you 90% of the people listening to this right now are going, "Oh dear, there's a few things on the list that I might not have done yet." So talk to me about the platform. How does this make our life easier when thinking about all of these things we have to do?
So what I wanted to do is I've just mentioned the fact that all of our life stages are different. All of the laws in Australia are different depending on what state you're in. So what I did is I developed a system that meets you where you're at. So it's very simple, 10 minutes a day. And at the end of the 15 days, you have a series of questions that you've answered each day. And what that does, it gives you a clear indication of what you do know and what you don't know and what
Mm,
you still need to gather. But most importantly, as part of that process, you've also gone through thinking, well, who is the person that I would feel comfortable to actually enter my home if I'm in hospital?
yeah.
Or if I have a pet, who can step in and actually feed them and take care of them if I end up in hospital? Because I'm the classic example. I was on my way to work. I ended up being hit by a car, ended up in hospital. It can
Mm,
happen at any point in time. And I think that that's the thing that some people forget is that, oh, it won't happen to me. I'm not old enough.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah.
I haven't hit that milestone age where I need to be adult enough and get my paperwork in place, like you just said, Danny.
Oh my God,
Um,
me.
so,
Yeah.
so at the end of the 15 days, you have nominated two key contacts that you will share your information with, and you can nominate that you share that information straight away, or when you are in hospital, or when you die. And then you have your to-do list of the documents you still need to collect. So in your case, it would be your advanced care directive. And then we connect you with organisations across Australia who can help support you get those documents done.
Oh my God, this is so good. I just feel like you've taken a topic that is difficult for some people to talk about and probably a bit complicated, actually, definitely a bit complicated, and
Yeah.
made it really simple and really like not confronting and manageable, which I just think is incredible.
Well, if anyone is looking at this on the YouTube version, you can see that I'm hardly a lack of color, morbid looking person. I'm wearing bright orange sparkly top. So I really do, people always say to me, how can you deal with death on a daily basis? But the thing is that it's never ever about death.
Mm,
It is everything that happens beforehand and everything that happens that after is what we actually have to deal with. It is
yeah.
never, very rarely, is it ever about the death itself. But we can really make a difference about the impact that that experience has is if you do preparation beforehand and have the conversations beforehand. And then that can make a massive difference of what comes after when someone does die. And it means that your family and your loved ones can just grieve freely and
Mm.
can feel like they're honoring your wishes because they have some sort of way to navigate that.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably been the biggest eye opener for me is the what do I want my loved ones to experience when I'm gone? And genuinely, I know I make the joke of my affairs are a mess, but it's like that's what you would be leaving people if you don't actually take steps to make things easy and accessible and have the right documentation and all of those bits and pieces. It is really an act of love to the people who you claim to say that you love.
It really truly is. And however, I'm not saying that, we did a focus group before we launched the platform in April of this year, which was a series of, I think, the third focus group that we had run in the development process. And we did that through the Carers Australia network. And the people
Mm,
felt that it went through that that focus group felt that there was preemptive grief. So the thought about
Ah.
their funeral, the thought about leaving their loved ones did impact how they were feeling about and how they were grieving. And so what we did is we actually increased the amount of reminiscence that we include in the platform
Mm.
because we know that research tells us that including storytelling actually alleviates and can help with the feelings of grief and depression. So, what we do is we've actually included a little gold nugget of sort of storytelling of each day. So, it might be about what's the first job you did for pocket money as a kid.
Oh, cool. And that's, oh my
Yeah.
God, I was just thinking as I'm answering the question as you're asking, I'm going, I did a paper run and I can guarantee you if my mum and dad read that, because I made my dad do it at 5 a.m. in the morning when I didn't want to get up, like they would just love to read that, you know? Oh my gosh, this is incredible.
And look, it was so much fun. Like I did it with my mum. My mum's 86. And I've got a son who's 21, so and my husband as well. So all of them have been guinea pigs in relation to this development process. And what I did with my mum is I sat down with her and on the first day we went because we she lives 3 hours away from me, so we did it in a block kind of session. So we did it the first day on a weekend. We did all of the logistical practical questions, and then on the second day we did the day 15, which is your funeral questions, but also all the storytelling as well. And she wouldn't let me video her, but she would allow me to audio record her voice. So for us as a family, and to know that now my son has access and all of her grandchildren
Wow.
will have access to her telling her stories to those questions in her own voice is kind of priceless, you know? And I think that it's a sad thing that we don't do often enough is we
Mm.
don't capture the beauty of our own stories and celebrate that. And while everyone thinks it might be boring and, something to do, there is some really beautiful things that have come out of it as well.
Yeah, I love that you said that. There's a woman in the Spark community who does life biographies and oftentimes of, I guess the average Joes of us. And that is literally the thing. Like people go, I've got nothing to say, no stories to tell, whatever it might be. But when they open up and they do share these things that perhaps they think are boring, the people around them that go, "Oh my God, I didn't know you went through that," or "I didn't know that that happened to you," or "Oh my, that is actually so interesting." I love that idea that we can document our stories and share that for the people around us. I just think that's brilliant.
It comes from one of those things that I'm sure that there's people who are listening now who have attended a funeral and they've never knew a certain fact or a fascinating story about someone until you're actually sitting at their funeral and you go, oh my God, I didn't know that they were a union rep, or I
Mm,
didn't know that they did that, because we don't take the time to ask those questions. And we sometimes just see, I suppose, a bit of a caricature of who that person is in our life and
yeah.
what they represent. But to actually really spend time is yeah, quite a privilege.
Wow, I absolutely love it. I just think this is such an incredible product that you have built. So, congratulations, and just so necessary for literally everyone on the planet.
Thank you, Danny. But it hasn't all been easy, and I'm sure we're about to go there.
Yes, absolutely. So, building an online platform, how's that been for you? Any challenges along the way? No,
No,
not at
it's
all.
all been a dream.
Oh my God. Disclose all. Tell me what's been happening.
Oh, look, it's one of those things where to start. It's such a roller coaster, as you're well aware. And when you're doing it yourself, and I've only really had the platform launch in April. We're only coming towards the end of the year now, so it's still very, very early days. But I think for me, what I've tried to do is try and always take, I suppose, my ego out of what we're doing.
Mm,
And so when I first started with that Excel spreadsheet, it was going to other people who were experts within the industry, who had been in this space for a long time, asking them for their thoughts and sort of saying, what do you think? Because I am not the expert. And what I found during that process is you then start identifying the gaps where you can start filling with
yeah.
what you provide. So, over the conversations that I was having, the surveys that I was doing with the public, with those sort of first people that I reached out to, um, that then formulated the way in which I could then build and fill the gaps that people were saying that they needed. So, one of the focus groups, one of the women said to me, look, I wouldn't know what to do if a loved one died tomorrow. And here I was working on this platform, you know, to work out planning, not to deal with the after effects. And so,
Yeah.
what I did is I developed a guide basically that takes you through a prioritized checklist of what you need to do immediately after someone dies. And it covers the decisions you need to make in the first hours, days, weeks, and months. Because I think that, the joy is that you're around about on average speaking with 50 to 100 different organizations when you're closing someone's account.
Wow.
And they estimate it's round about 200 hours that you spend when you're closing someone's estate.
Wow.
So to have a guide that tells you what you can do in the first 24 hours and what you can then delegate to someone else or actually leave a few days is really, really important because it's so
Mm,
overwhelming when you're faced with that and you're trying to grieve and get over the shock and trauma of a loved one who's just died. So that was a product that we developed last year and that's been available. And that's been a really lovely tool and something that people have been able to give feedback on straight away over the last
mm,
sort of 12 months. So, again, listening to the audience, what we did is we then have just released a modified version of that where the printed version now has QR codes that actually links to all of the active links in the guide
oh,
so
wow.
people can link to them because what we found is that older audiences wanted something that was printed that they could make notes in.
Mm,
Things like the checklist can seem quite overwhelming, so we actually segmented that into what was a self-care thing to be focusing on, what was a decision, and what was a task.
mm,
And then because we were redeveloping it just before we became we also be published it and distributed on Amazon in October. What we did is we wanted to make sure that there was a curated version of the Don't Be Caught Dead podcast episodes that could support people through their process. So talking about funerals, talking about ritual, memorial, to help them make the decisions that they may need
mm.
to make in that sort of first couple of days after someone dies. So that was just an example of the fact that we've constantly always been testing it with our audience, hearing what their feedback has been, and then, making sure we're, producing the services and the products that they're asking for.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting to me because you say it so nonchalantly that you have spoken to your audience, that you've got feedback, that you've got industry experts, you've interviewed, you've done focus groups. So many people start a business, grow a business based on their own experiences, and then wonder why things don't land, and also think that the first thing they put out needs to be perfect and, never change. And it's just so far from the truth. I just love that, you are literally the epitome of best practice in terms of in terms of creating a product and doing that research first. But then also once you've put it out, adapting. So getting feedback from your customers and changing it so that it serves them the best. And you've talked about the process just as if that's what you do, but it is just so important to put a pin in because so many people miss that. They just worried about getting it wrong, so they don't ask the questions, get the feedback, whether it be before, during, or after they've shipped a product. And I just think if you can be willing to hear the feedback from your customers and take that on and not take it as a you're wrong, but take it as a this is how you can help co-create something that really serves our need, your products, your business will just go so much further.
It will, but we're not quite at that stage yet, because we still have that challenge of being young,
Mm.
and
Well, this is
in a
never ending,
taboo,
right?
yeah, in a
Mm.
taboo topic that's not openly discussed. It has, cultural layers on top of that as well,
Mm.
so it's super challenging. And also it's that classic thing of, being first to market, doing
Mm.
something that no one's done before is really challenging to try and find, you know, uh, that product market fit,
Yeah.
and that's the stage that we're at now. And that involves just a lot of, again, testing, messaging, I've just decided I'm actually going to be launching a crowdfunding,
Oh,
campaign in the new
cool.
year. So just it's just constantly hustling,
Mm.
but not without significant success. We have managed to actually speak to amazing experts that has opened up wonderful doors for us, and people have been extremely supportive and large organizations. An example is we've just finished a national pilot program whereby we had end of life doulas trial the platform with their clients who
Mm.
have a life limiting illness diagnosis. And so, we've worked with them to see how we can actually, use the platform and what we need to tweak. So we developed resources to support them in that process. And then from there, those that was also supported by an organization called Sustainable Funerals Group, who actually sponsored the subscription, lifetime subscriptions for those clients who had been
Wow.
diagnosed so they could actually get, their affairs in order, which is amazing, to
Yeah,
actually
that's
have that
incredible.
done. Um, there's a very brave aged care organisation in Western Australia who had heard about the work we were doing through Palliative Care Australia in an interview I'd done with Camilla Rowland, who's the CEO there, earlier last year. And she contacted me in August of last year, Maria, at Davison at Melville Cares in Western Australia. And she said, look, I love what you're doing. We want to, offer it to our, 2,000 clients in Western Australia. So that has started a process. So we just completed a pilot program with their volunteers. So their
Wow.
volunteers are now all trained up on the platform, and then we're heading over there in February of next year to support and sort of raise awareness of the pilot program that we're running with them. And hopefully we actually will then have that as a model that we can take across Australia. And what we've been doing is we had funding. We're actually a member of the Good Death Impact Network. Yes, there is such a thing.
This is the first time hearing about it. Yes.
Um, so that is a group of people who have gathered together, who have similar values and goals to really accelerate what we can do as a collective
Wow.
and support each other in collaboration. So Everyone can be an expert from either end of life planning, death care, or bereavement. And from that, we received some funding to test both of these pilot programs that I mentioned against the Death Literacy Index and the Coping with Death Scale. And both of these are international scales and recognised. So we can then actually clearly show to organisations that the work that we are doing makes a difference, and people not only complete the experience and the platform, but people have actually then gone on to act and do their to-do list. So,
Wow. And it sounds, if I'm hearing you correctly, that growth thus far has really been a result of collaboration, building relationships, doing those expert interviews, really getting feedback from people, which is triggering a word of mouth because you are doing something so incredible and are a first mover.
and I think that that comes from me working at the Botanic Gardens for 13 years, where we had
Yeah.
no budget. You know, we had to actually do programming purely based on collaboration and partnership and,
Mm,
bringing multiple stakeholders together for a combined goal and reason. And so that has always been just how I've worked. But by doing that, it means that you also develop a better service to deliver to people because you're providing them with direct access to the support that they need. And that's what our role is. The platform, we're not the exports expert, and the guide, we're not the expert. And again, the podcast, we're not the expert. But what we do is that we've made it bite size, and we've made it easy to understand, and we've allowed people to, I suppose, have a map so they can
mm,
navigate it, because that's the thing that I found the most challenging is that even me, with working for a state government organisation for 13 years, I could not navigate death when our
mm.
friend died. And I just thought, how the hell can anyone else?
Exactly. Yeah, it is such a wild idea that something that is so universal is so complicated and so out of reach in a time where that's not what you want to be thinking about. So then talk to me about you. Now, you mentioned the accident, you mentioned chronic pain, but you have gone from a very impressive career to now building a very impressive business. How do you actually manage yourself and looking after you as a business owner whilst building something so incredible?
It's not advisable to have a car accident to do it. Um,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
but what I would say is that because I had no choice but to put my health first,
Mm,
it meant that when I've gone into developing systems for my business, the fact that I even actually developed a SaaS platform and a digital guide and a podcast and the website, like all of these things don't need for me to be physically there to make them happen.
yeah, yep.
And so that means that if I'm feeling like a nap after this interview, I can.
Mm,
There is days where I need to not actually be sitting at my computer desk. And the way in which my thing is like walking the dog. Um, I have to actually, do deep water running a couple of days a week at the pool
ah,
just
wow.
to actually make sure that I don't have any impact on my spine, but I'm still keeping active. I make sure I have a magnesium float once a month.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that is I love that time. And then where I go, they give me a little peppermint tea and a little biscuit, and that is just my time.
Mm.
Um, However, it's just as important for me to catch up with my girlfriend. I've got a really close girlfriend and quite a few girlfriends that I actually make sure I carve out time for us. Um, and then of late, I did my first vision board, so that was exciting.
Oh, I love that. Love a bit of woo woo in the business
Yeah,
chats. Yes.
yeah, yeah. I did my first vision board and some of it came through. So that was pretty weird.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah,
See, I told
yeah,
you it works. It works, people.
yeah, 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 yeah. It actually did. Um, so yeah, they're
I
the sort
just,
of things.
yeah, and I love the idea that you're hyper aware of what you need and you've created a business that aligns to that. And when you need to take time, you can, but also that you factor in the things that you need to look after yourself as well. I just think it's another important conversation to have because, especially as so this will air in the new year, but we're talking at the end of the year, and it's about that time where everyone's feeling a little
Mm.
overwhelmed and burnt out, and oh my God, what's the point of it all? And I think a lot of that is just a result of not prioritizing you as the human, as the business owner.
And look, there's days when I'm pretty crap at it as well, and I
Same.
need to be pulled
Most
back in
days,
line.
actually.
Um, but like all in all, I do try to make sure that I put that focus on me
Mm,
and another thing I did right from the start is I didn't have the skills to do the development of the platform, so I found someone who did, and they take care of all of that, and
mm.
they actually were with me for a year in conversation before we actually developed. So that was really
Wow.
important to develop that relationship before we actually then went to technology development. And the other thing is, like, I've never edited my own podcast, you know.
Yep.
I don't know about you, Danny. Do you do yours?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear
No,
my voice.
no, no. So the beauty is that there was skills that I knew straight away that I didn't have that other people
Yeah.
were better at. And so I just make sure that I delegated those.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that actually is such a good thing to put a pin in as well. Because again, overachieving business owners that we are, oftentimes we're like, I should be the best at everything. And it's like, no, do your thing. Like you're an expert in something, whatever it is. And so much stuff. I learned a really good, I talk about it in Spark. It's a good like $1,000 tasks versus $1 tasks. And there are things that you add value to as a business owner. So in my business, I'm the only person that can be here interviewing you, but I add zero value to editing it. I add zero value to chopping it all up for social posts. I add so I consider them $1 tasks because I can't, because anyone can do them. And then this is $1,000 task because I am the only one that can do it. And that delineation for me of knowing what I need to do and I add the most value to, and what I don't need to do and what I add no value to,
Yeah.
was just so huge for me in yeah, making sure I wasn't the bottleneck to the business.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that can be perceived like I will go to a networking event or something along that line or a conference, and people go, "Oh my God, you're so busy." I'm like, it may appear that I am so busy, but that is
Yeah.
because I have a good podcast editor that
Yeah.
creates amazing content for me. And
Yeah.
then at the moment, I now have my 21-year-old son doing my social media for me, because my
Nice.
normal VA is actually on maternity leave.
Oh.
So, but, like people also, again, it comes back to appearances. What you
Mm,
see on social media it is an illusion, like
yeah.
it is something that is not real. It's great that I appear that I'm super active. That's fantastic. That's let's
I love
you
that you
know
think that of me. Great.
but the reality is that
Yeah.
it's just actually making sure I invest the time that I want for, like you said, your $1
Mm.
versus your, what was it? One
$1,000
thousand?
tasks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for me to turn up to a conference or to a networking event is where my time and energy
Mm.
is.
Yep.
But managing my social media, unless like it's a content making day, such as today being a content making day, because I'm wearing makeup and looking pretty, um, Like you just got to block your time accordingly. And the other
Yeah.
thing that people are always amazed about is, and this is something that's a real hangover from the programming days at the gardens, is that I would block and program 3 months in advance.
Mm.
So when I'm saying that, it's, nowadays it's about social media.
Yeah.
Um, but and looking at what sort of days that I want to commemorate and what days that I want to see critical info supporting or me, Catherine Ashton, supporting on my social media, using an Excel spreadsheet to actually map all of that out.
Mm.
And then mapping our, podcast guests and what they're talking about in relation to that, but also then mapping what conferences are going on that you can actually leverage off, all of that sort of stuff. So just being really clever in the fact that instead of actually being responsive, you actually spend the time to actually do that pre-planning, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, it really does. And I find as well, just from a mental load point of view, if I've done the thinking on a day where I am, so we were talking about this before we hit record, but I've been a bit sniffly this week. And so when you feel like that, you don't want to think. I don't have a
Yeah.
brain this week. Like it's just like things are in my calendar, so I'm showing up and I'm doing them, but I don't have any creative drive this week. But because I've done that pre-planning, I don't have to. So, yeah, the value of actually mapping things out and knowing what's happening or even scheduling things in advance, like that time blocking and batching is just a godsend, I think, as a business owner when things get out of your control, like getting sick or needing to look after someone or needing to do, something unexpected comes up. Yeah, I think the power is in the planning.
Yeah, and even small things like, which I'm sure you do with the podcast, using Calendarly so you're not actually
Mm.
managing your own diary. Like I also block out every Friday, like that's just like a no-go day for
Yeah.
anyone. Like that's my catch-up day. So just having those things without any guilt, like I've never had any guilt
Yeah.
associated with any of that because, for me to actually function on a level that I need to, that just has to happen. That's like survival.
Yeah, totally. And I love that you've put those boundaries in place for yourself. It's interesting, like those things that I think are a form of self-care, as us business owners, because if we can save ourselves time and sanity, that means we do have space for creative thought, innovative ideas, make our business better, grow our business bigger, make a bigger impact. And that's where the magic is at.
Yeah, and I think that when you're not doing that, I think, I'm not the one to be talking about this, but I know that there is research that, when you're not thinking about your business, you're not actively working in it, it allows your
Mm,
brain to go to another part of, the compartment that we don't use that often, and
yes.
that creative thinking side of our brain. And that's when the magic happens. That's those shower
Mm,
moments, or
yeah,
for me, lying in the flotation tank and I go, oh my God, that's it.
that's so good. This is literally the second conversation I've had in the last couple of weeks about float tanks. And now I'm like, okay, that's it. I've got to get into one because I need the inspiration, please.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
Oh my God, I love it. I could talk to you all day, but I better wrap up. So, I always love to finish these podcasts on one last piece of advice. So, reflecting on your time in business, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to another woman on her business journey?
Automate as much as you possibly can. And
I think
whether
that
that's
is
through,
such a good lesson.
whether that's through Chat GPT, whether it's through Calendarly, whether it's through, delegation, uh, automate as much as possible. So you just free yourself up to do what you really need to do that's the important work.
Oh, I love it. Catherine, you are the best. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your wisdom with the Spark community. That was absolutely incredible.
Thank you so much, Danny.
That wraps another episode of Spark TV. Shout out to Spark TV sponsor IP Australia for their amazing support of the Spark podcast and women in business. And if no one tells you today, you've got this.